Nobody played at a higher level in the playoffs than Michael Jordan. Beating him in a 7-game series was virtually impossible in the 90s. Teams had no answers on how to stop him. Well, there were a couple of teams who turned Jordan into an inefficient volume scorer. Those two teams were coached by the same person, Pat Riley. Although there were plenty of times when Michael had huge scoring performances against a Pat Riley coached team, there are two specific seasons where they did a great job of stopping the most prolific scorer in NBA history. Let's talk about the first season, which was the 1993 New York Knicks. Here's how well they defended him. In the regular season, Jordan averaged 26.6 points on 33.6% shooting against New York. In their conference final series, he averaged 32.2 points on 40% shooting. That is the second lowest percentage for a playoff series of his career. But that's not all. In Game 3, he had the worst game in his playoff career in terms of efficiency. He was 3 of 18 from the field, which is 16.7%. We'll talk more about that game in just a moment. But first, let's answer this question. How were they able to contain him so well that season? It all starts with their incredibly tough front line. We're talking about Patrick Ewing, Charles Oakley, and Anthony Mason. The Knicks played a physical style that turned every game into a cage fight. That's what allowed them to lead the league in defensive rating, opponents' points per game, and opponents' field goal percentage. The player that was mostly responsible for the defensive dominance was Patrick Ewing. He earned an 8.1 defensive win shares, which is the third highest rating since the merger. He was an expert at deterring shots and allowing very few second chance points, and he had a favorable matchup against the Bulls. The reason is that they had no low post game. Bill Cartwright was a shell of himself, and Horace Grant was playing through a sprained ankle. He didn't have to guard anybody, so he was free to roam the lane and completely shut the middle down when Jordan looked to attack the rim. And when he did, two players would always collide with him. Then there was the efforts of John Starks. He hounded Michael everywhere he went and made him work for every point he scored. This was the Pat Riley effect that helped the Knicks become a true title contender. They were going to play desperate, reckless, and harder than anyone else. They were going to get into your head by turning a basketball game into a wrestling match. This was even the case for the great Michael Jordan. For the first 2 games, he was playing selfishly at times, taking shots he shouldn't have been taking. It seemed like they had the Bulls right where they wanted them. But they ended up losing 4 games in a row after being up 2-0. What happened? Well, remember when I said that they forced Jordan to the worst playoff game of his career in Game 3? Well, do you know that they still lost that game by 20 points? How is that possible? For one, Michael Jordan is much more than just a scorer. So when his shooting struggles continued, he decided to shift his attention to other aspects of the game. When he drove to the basket, he saw those same defenders colliding with him, and he passed the ball to his teammates for open shots. Then you had the defense of the Chicago Bulls, who was just as stifling as the Knicks. Their full court press rattled New York and forced them to 20 turnovers in Game 3. Then there was Scottie Pippen, who stepped up big time. He averaged 22.5 points on 51% shooting for the series. By the way, Michael Jordan wasn't completely shut down. In Game 4, he had 54 points on 60% shooting, which included going 6 of 9 from the 3. Is it a shocker to anyone that he had one of his greatest playoff performances right after he had one of his worst? We all should have seen it coming. But this wasn't just a one-off moment for Pat Riley. He would use that same formula when he coached the Miami Heat. He also turned them into the toughest and meanest defensive team in the late 90s. In the 1996-97 season, they ranked first in defensive rating and first in opponents' field goal percentage. This pushed them to win 61 games. What was his secret? Was it simply to turn each team he coached for into the Bad Boy Pistons 2.0? Not exactly. It was much more than that. It has been said that Riley dedicated a large amount of time to defense during practice and would often hand out grades of each player's defensive performance from the previous game. They were the most prepared team in the league, not named the Chicago Bulls. They also had two things going for them. They had the front line of Alonzo Mourning and P.J. Brown. Mourning is widely considered one of the greatest shot blockers in league history. That season, he nearly averaged 3 blocks per game, while also finishing first in defensive rating. Then P.J. Brown was arguably the best defensive power forward at the time, who prided himself in doing all the dirty work. And I mean that in every sense of the word. He finished 5th in defensive rating that season. The second thing they had going for them was that they were excellent at double teaming. Riley is a master at getting the right players to rotate as teams try to pass to their open man. He had rotations for each player choreographed to perfection. So when they faced the Chicago Bulls in the conference finals, they were going to plan on making things extremely tough for them. And what we saw was quite possibly the ugliest playoff series in NBA history. If you don't believe me, check out the final score of Game 2. It was 75-68. Not even Michael Jordan was able to save it. For the series, he averaged 30.2 points on 38.7% shooting. This was the least efficient he has ever been in the playoffs. How were they able to make the greatest player of all time look so mortal? He explained why after Game 3. He said this to reporters, quote, "Our offense depends on movement, and it's hard to get that movement against a team that grabs and bumps and holds." End of quote. During this time, the league allowed much more physicality. There was no such thing as freedom of movement in the late 90s. So the Heat forced the Bulls to turn into a one-man offense, and Jordan literally had nowhere to go. As we mentioned for John Starks in that 1993 series, Vashawn Leonard shadowed Michael everywhere he went. If he was able to escape, he would inevitably find a double team waiting for him. He had no choice but to take tough mid-range shots. The result was ugly. There were even 2 games where his field goal percentage was in the 20s. You would think this would be the game plan to defeat the Chicago Bulls. However, they lost the series 4-1. They suffered a gentleman's sweep because the Bulls had no problems winning games ugly. Their defense proved to be just as good as Miami's. Their most overlooked strength was his ability to take away an opponent's top offensive threat. They contained Alonzo to only 15 points per game, and Tim Hardaway shot 35% for the series. They knew they had to master defensive intensity, and they did. The Heat got so frustrated to the point that they resorted to dirty tactics. In Game 4, as they were looking to avoid getting swept, Alonzo Mourning elbowed Scottie Pippen in the head on one play. Then he decided to try out as a WWE star by wrestling Dennis Rodman to the ground. This was the type of physical play that the Bulls questioned out loud if it was bad for the NBA. There's no doubt that they took things too far at times. Maybe this was the only way Pat Riley believed that they could defeat the Bulls in a playoff series. Maybe because Jordan scored 50 points against them in the regular season, he felt the need to go overboard. Who knows? Although he never succeeded in knocking him out in the playoffs, he found the formula of how to contain the GOAT. But what about you all? What do you remember the most from those playoff battles? What do you think was the main reason Michael Jordan struggled at times against those teams? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.